Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. This is going to be a quick revisit to the WingSung 699. A viewer asked about cleaning out the cap because he had gotten ink into the cap and it got between this cap liner and the inside of the cap, which makes it difficult to clean out. So looking at the pen, I just assumed that this top finial would unscrew. So I took a little rubber gripper and it came out very easily, and that held in this ring and it held in the clip. Once you've unscrewed it, then you can just push out the cap liner. In theory, you might be able to get in there and pull out the cap liner, but it's in there pretty solidly. It took a little bit of effort to push it out, but that shows you how it disassembles. So while I was at it, I thought I might revisit the pen and write with it, and it wouldn't write. I had unscrewed the blind cap. I waited a little bit of time for the ink to resaturate the feed, and nothing. So I wet the nib, hit the nib on the paper, or I did everything I could do. I'd get a little bit of ink now and then it would stop writing. So even though this has a nice cap liner, and this had probably set for over a month, so it had been in my, but I have a lot of pens that I don't use for that period of time. So I'm going to revisit this pen a little bit more. We're going to show you the examples I had of trying to get it to write, and then I'm going to reassemble it and let it set nib down with that blind cap open for a day, and we'll see if it improves the flow or gets it to write better. So here's examples, and many of you may have experienced this, where the nib just wouldn't put down any ink and then a little bit would come out. I was dipping the nib in some water, rinsing it off, then it would write for a little bit, then it would stop writing, then it would write a little bit, and each of these times I was doing different things to get that ink flow coming back through the feed. So my theory is when you shut off the ink flow with that shutoff valve, any ink in the nib and feed dries out because it's not being replenished by ink inside the pen. And I've had this with a little bit of my 355s and 456s from Pen BBS. Any pen that has a shutoff valve, I've found that to be a little bit of a challenge, except the Opus 88, but then I haven't had that for more than a month. So let's see over time how that works out, because I have forgotten to undo the blind cap that seals it off, and it does run out of ink, but you write for a while before it runs out of ink. So I think one of the keys to minimizing the ink starvation is to have more ink in the nib and feed before the shutoff valve, and then hopefully it'll stay it a little bit longer, and maybe having it seal a little bit better. But even down here, it would write for a while and I would still get some skipping. So again, we're going to reassemble the pen, let it set for a while, and then revisit the writing. After many attempts to try to get the 699 to write consistently, I chalked it up to the ink, and it needed a thorough cleaning because it's been many months since I inked it up. In fact, I inked it up when I reviewed it and just wrote with it occasionally and haven't used it consistently. So rather than try to determine whether it's an ink problem or a pen problem, I just took it apart. It was very easy to clean out. You know, the piston works well, and I know this ring unscrews and you can remove the whole piston assembly, but I used my rubber gripper. I did what I could do, and it's not budging for me, and I was able to clean it out very well without removing that rod and piston, so therefore I'm not going to push it. I don't want to really break this pen. I do think it looks nice. The cap, it reassembled. It took me a while to line up everything, but eventually I did that and it worked out fine. The nib and feed pull out of the section very easily. The section unscrews, and obviously we'll silicone grease the end of that before we reinsert it. And yeah, it does have that O-ring there. I would have used a clear one, but they used a black one. But you don't really notice it. The pen always wrote a little dry, so I thought I would look to see what I could do on the feed to get it to write wetter, and I noticed something in this design. And looking at the feed, because I wanted to try to increase the flow, and most of the time what you'll do is you'll increase the width of this channel or make certain that channel is nice and clean, so you'll floss it. But I noticed there's this little plug right here. And the channel is clear up until the plug, and then it's clear from the plug all the way out to the end of the feed where the nib sits. I'm toying with taking out that plug. I'm not certain why it's there, but when I'm looking at this feed, I just am blown away by the complexity of this design with the fins and the channels and the holes, and I don't quite understand why these feeds have become very complex. You know, none of those fins reach that channel, so they really don't facilitate the flow of ink down the channel. So I decided to compare it to a Moonman feed. Just because it's similar, it's a Chinese feed, injection molded, and I cannot imagine the complexity of the mold design that allows this to be done, and I'm pretty certain it's done in one step. It doesn't look like these are pieces that are assembled, but I could be mistaken. So the Pen BBS channel runs clean from one end to the other, and both of these channels are about the same width, which is 0.1 millimeters or 4/1000ths of an inch. If you turn them over, they have a functional design that's similar between these two. You know, you got that channel in the back of the feed, which to me facilitates filling it. Yeah, a little bit different design there at the end. You know, we have that number in the Moonman one, which to me corresponds to the number of the cavity in the mold. Pen BBS doesn't have it. Are these both made from the same materials? I don't think so, because the Moonman one has more of a shine to it, and this is a more matte finish, and I think that's more of a tribute to the materials used or the filler that was used. I've read somewhere that ABS is the resin it's preferred to use for feeds, so these both could be ABS, but maybe different grades of ABS or different fillers used in them. So I just find this amazing how these designs can be so similar and so different just to accomplish the same thing as bringing ink from the reservoir to the nib and onto the paper. So we're going to reassemble. I'm going to use an ink that I haven't used for a while, but I think it will work well in this pen. At least I hope it does. I wanted to go to a white background just to show you those fins that are in these feeds. I mean, they're very thin, and you can see the Pen BBS fins are a little thinner, and we know how fragile they can be when you try to pull out the nib. But there's just a ton of fins there, and I personally don't see the need for them. If you look at the side, there seems to be a seam there in the Pen BBS feed, which isn't in the Moonman feed. Again, you can see those fins, see how long they are, see how thin they are, and see how many of them there are. Design that certainly escapes the logic that I might have, considering when you look at vintage feeds, and they're very simple and they work very well. In exploring these two feeds, the Moonman's on the top, the Pen BBS is on the bottom, I found an interesting quirk in the diameter of the feed. The Moonman one starts out at 6.2 and goes down to a 6.0 millimeter. 6 millimeter is supposedly one of the things that is used to designate a number 6 nib. If you look at the Pen BBS feed, it starts at a 6.3, so it's a little bit wider, and then it goes up to a 6.5, and you kind of expect that because the Pen BBS feed has a little notch here, and it's designed to accommodate the nib in one spot, whereas the Moonman feed, you can pretty much slide that nib around depending upon how it fits into the section. So an anomaly. So you might ask, why does the Pen BBS feed have this extension here and the Moonman feed doesn't? Because the Moonman feed is going into a vac filler, not a cartridge converter. And when you put this into that nib collar, this is what extends up and contacts with the ink in the cartridge converter. If you look at the feeds from pen BBS that are in non-cartridge converter pens, you won't find that. Before we do the writing, let's investigate the ink a little bit more. Yes, it's a KWZ. I refuse to phoneticize those initials. And there's your batch number on it, which I think has something to do with the year, but I'm not certain. Could be 2016. Yes, I bought it from Van Ness. And I wanted a darker brown, and I think this will do the job. This is kind of in a reddish brown. If we look at the chromatography, we'll see definitely there's some red in there, some very intense red, and also some kind of blue-gray. So that got me interested in exactly what is brown as a color. It's certainly not on the color wheel. So it's kind of an interesting color, and here's what I found for a description, which I think is appropriate. Doesn't appear to be any sheen. So on my color wheel, there is no brown, but one way to make brown is to mix black with orange. And as we go down this color wheel, this is adding more black to that original color. So you have red, and red-orange. We'll see down here something that is kind of similar to the KWZ brown number 4. So I found my original review of the writing sample with the 699, and this was never a wet or consistent writer with that Pen BBS POTUS 45 ink. So let's see what the KWZ ink does. After figuring out that the ink may have been a problem, and you'll notice that cap is undone, so I got good flow. Don't want to forget to do that. The blind cap is undone. The main cap comes off in about 1 1/4 turns, which is very nice. I mean, the pen fits well in the hand. It has good weight to it. It posts securely, and it doesn't change the weight much. It's a little bit more back weighted than before. Solid posting. So let's see how that KWZ brown ink works in this pen. Well, this KWZ brown ink certainly lays down a much denser line than the Pen BBS ink did. Wetness seems about the same, but with this more saturated color, and I also think it flows better. So I rated this originally at an 8.6, and I have to revisit that. So my new rating is a 9.3 because now it writes well, and it's a writer that I would definitely use on an everyday basis. So the pen, just by changing the ink, and I also, cleaned out the feed and did a few minor adjustments. You're always going to get some feedback from this nib. And the nib does have a little bit of softness to it, a little bit of bounciness. Get a little bit of extra ink if you push it a little bit, but certainly not a nib I would do that with. So hopefully you've enjoyed this revisit to a pen, and I definitely enjoy it more. So that shows you that just changing ink and a few other minor little things can change a pen to not an everyday writer to, hey, this is a pretty good pen for an everyday writer. That ink is still drying. So thank you for watching. As my handwriting totally degrades from being limited by the tripod. So it's been a tough couple weeks, and I think there'll be many more weeks to follow. Recovery will be slow, but it will happen. Hopefully you all have stayed safe and healthy and enjoyed life to the fullest that you can. Used some pens, wrote some letters, shared your experiences with others at the respectable social distance. So that's the end of this video. We're going to say bye until the next video. Nib was off the paper. And this definitely is nice, and that KWZ ink certainly has that chemical smell.